Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach. The very last of the 613 commandments, representing the vastness of all of our tradition, is that every Jewish adult should write their own Sefer Torah, their own Torah scroll. It's actually a commandment that was in the Torah a few weeks ago, Parshat Vayelech, where God says, "So now write this song for yourselves." I think this would have been a challenging commandment at any time to fulfill. In ancient times, Jews were more familiar with the Torah. There was so much less information, so much less books and stories out there. And there was a time when Jews, whenever they came up for an aliyah to the Torah, they would not only say the blessings, but read from the Torah itself without preparation, and were able to do that. To this day, Yemenite Jews still follow this practice more or less. Whereas the Torah teaches the Torah should be on our lips, and it was. I remember one of my teachers at Pardes, an institute of Jewish learning in Jerusalem, was a rabbi who read Torah for his Hashkama minyan, for his early morning minyan every week, the whole Parsha. He'd been doing it for 30 years. And he knew almost the whole Torah by heart. If you told him one verse, he'd be able to chant that verse and then chant the next verse after that. And for years, it was a mark of achievement in the Jewish world to have memorized the whole Torah. Not an easy feat. But to write a Torah scroll, that takes a lot of time and dedication. It said in Maimonides, he took a year out of his life to be able to write a Torah scroll, putting a lot of his other duties on hold. And the Torah, as Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach says, is God's love letter to the Jewish people. And it's a great mitzvah for us to know that love letter that's coming from God. And so we're doing here every week. We chant it, we study it, we try to absorb it. One of my favorite comments in our new Sidurim, it says at the Kaddish Shalem, right before the Torah service, as we conclude our Shacharit service and turn to the public reading of the Torah, we hope that our prayers will have tilled and plowed our consciousness, loosening our hearts and minds so that the words of Torah might drip down deep within, nourishing the seeds our prayers have planted. As Louis Finkelstein once noted, our love for the Torah is only in part rationalistic. In the main, we need not be ashamed or confess it. It is emotional, intuitive, and mystic. Prayer prepares us for the word of Torah to penetrate deep within us. Perhaps above all, the Torah, as God's love letter to us through the millennia, is symbolic of our relationship to God, of the covenant, of our faith, of our 4,000-year-old tradition. There is such tremendous power and beauty in so many passages of our ancient scriptures. It teaches us how to live by example of our ancestors, or it guides us specifically in certain situations with its timeless words through all the contradictions and challenges of life, balancing our needs and other people's needs, integrating compassion within our life as a driving force, and how we do everything, how we deal with our enemies, how we deal with our fellows, and our own failures. And our mitzvot, they've been studied for thousands of years by our sages and lived by Jewish people. But Torah is even more than that, because a Torah scroll is holy in its entirety, when it's all together. And as we know, even if one letter of the Torah is erased, the whole Torah is no longer valid. It says in the Psalms, Torat Hashem Temima, the teaching of the Lord is perfect, flawless, renewing life. The decrees of the Lord are enduring, making the simple wise. The precepts of the Lord are just, rejoicing the heart. The instruction of the Lord is lucid, making the eyes light up. More desirable than gold, than much fine gold, sweeter than honey, than drippings of the comb. And as a whole, the Torah represents a whole way of life. A way of life that is enduring, that is just, that is lucid, that is more desirable than gold, finer than fine gold, sweeter than even the honey dripping from the honeycomb. And it is That first word, Torah Hashem Tmima, it is perfect, blameless. So these are words that God says to Abraham in Genesis. He says, be blameless, be tamim. And he wasn't saying you have to be perfect. He was saying put your whole being into the relationship. Put your whole self into it. Give your very best. And even though it is in the details that render a Torah scroll perfect for us, because it has to be written the correct way, precisely following all the different laws, relating to how you write God's name, relating to where paragraphs begin and end, what materials you have to use. But in the end, what renders the totality of a Torah scroll perfect for us is the fullness of relationship and the presence that it brings to us into our lives. Reminding us of the relationship that we go to such great lengths to treasure and keep precious and to teach to our children. What is it that makes a Torah scroll holy? It's not the fact that it contains the 5 books of Moses only, but it's in fact how many times God's name is written by the scribe, Yud He Vav He, and written with a sense of devotion and sanctity. There's even a custom for a sofer, if he's going to be writing God's name in a scroll that day, to go to the mikvah to make sure that he is pure before writing the name. So the Torah is a symbol of our closeness to the Creator and all that we do to honor it. And tomorrow we're going to be welcoming in a new Torah scroll into our congregation. A wonderful blessing for all of us. The idea of it came out of looking last Simchat Torah at the whole Torah unrolled in all of its beauty. And so tomorrow we'll be parading it around the block and we'll be singing and dancing, which is the way Jews have welcomed the new Torah into their congregation for many long years. And that ritual of dancing with the Torah and parading into the synagogue is not based on the idea of completing the writing of God's teaching, but it's based on a moment in the Bible when King David brought the Ark of the Covenant itself into Jerusalem, into the temple. According to tradition, the Ark housed the 10 Commandments, and there was the powerful symbol of holiness and of God's presence on earth. So when David brought the ark through the streets into Jerusalem, even David, the king, twirled and danced and rejoiced, and the musicians played instruments. And they were rejoicing not only that the 10 Commandments were coming among them, but that God's very presence was entering into their new capital, Jerusalem, and they were moved to great joy. Because when we bring a new Torah into our congregation, Tmima, perfect, sweet as honey, finer than gold, we are celebrating all that it teaches us, how its precepts guide us. We're also celebrating the presence that it is bringing us, the closeness to the Creator in our deepest selves. And we're dancing with that love letter. This morning we read how God revealed himself to Moses as the 13 attributes of compassion. So we are dancing with the all-merciful one. We may not be able to easily fulfill the mitzvah of writing our own Torah scroll, our own Sefer Torah, but we can come as close as we can by bringing one into our community, by dancing with it and celebrating with it, and honoring the source of our vitality. Shabbat Shalom.